I had planned to go live this morning at 9:30, but technical difficulties meant that wasn't possible. So I'm here now, better late than never, as they say. So I want to talk about, is parental alienation illegal in the UK? As a standalone offence, no, parental alienation is not illegal. Even with the addition of alienating behaviours within the domestic abuse bill, the recent domestic abuse bill, it's still technically, you couldn't go into a police station and say, I want to have someone arrested for parental alienation. The new guidance, the domestic abuse guidance, does give you some more leeway on the criminal side, but again, it would have to fit under some of the other terminology within the domestic abuse bill. So financial abuse, coercive control, post-separation abuse, child abuse, those kind of things. And that's where it is criminal. I guess part of this discussion is, how would that look? How would it look to take domestic abuse and therefore alienation into a criminal court? Because it is a criminal offence. It is coercive control, and that is a criminal offence. It is domestic abuse, which is now recognised as being a criminal offence. It is child abuse, which is recognised as a criminal action. So all of the behaviour that incorporates alienation is illegal, but parental alienation as a term isn't. And so, in terms of going to court, criminal court that is, you would have to present it under those different umbrellas. So as coercive control, as domestic abuse, as child abuse, as post-separation abuse, as financial abuse, all of those factors would be the criminal element. I guess what comes up for me with this, and I am just being honest about it, is I know something has to change. Family court is not dealing with alienation at the moment, and that might take time. Is criminal court the answer? Well, it would certainly be different because of the process. In family court, it's looking at the balance of probabilities. In criminal court, it is more, there's more proof, that it requires more proof, and I can't think what the term is. It's just flown out of my head. Beyond a reasonable doubt, there we go, it came back. And we know that most people that experience alienation do have that vast amount of evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt that manipulation of the child has occurred. It's getting it to court that may be problematic, but equally, I suppose for me, from a child protection perspective, it's the impact on the child of, I'll come back to that. It's because criminal court is more public, and the family courts do have that privacy to protect children. That's why it came out, is they didn't want children in the press. They didn't want them named because it was their lives. And I agree with that. But obviously that secrecy is creating those problems, that lack of accountability, which you have in criminal courts. But it's still, for me, the uncomfortable thing is around the children and protecting their future and their identities from school and from the future as well, because once it's out there, it's out there. And that's just what comes up. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. I'm just being honest about what I feel from that. But I think in terms of it being in a high court, there are There are difficulties in getting it there, so let's cover that. So the difficulties in getting it there are the CPS. Domestic abuse is incredibly difficult to, beyond reasonably doubt, prove, because it's subjective. It is two people's version of events. And I don't know if any of you have seen Anatomy of a Scandal. It's a really good representation of how difficult it is for behaviour that it happens in private between two people to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. And I guess part of me is concerned with parental alienation is, again, that triangulation of children into that. And that, I mean, that's for all the domestic abuse. My big fear is children being triangulated. And I know that happens anyway in alienation. So, and also with, you know, narcissistic parents, they will bring them in. So it may not make things any worse. But again, just being honest about my concerns. So the CPS are going to receive this, and they are the ones that go yes or no to it going to court based on whether they think it's financially worth their time and effort of putting this case together to go before a criminal judge. What's the likelihood of getting a conviction? And that's the difficulty with domestic abuse cases, is what is the likelihood? And I guess that's what would change, is how do we investigate them? And this is where potentially the good news can come in, is there would have to be a more thorough investigation. There would be an involvement of experts. So, and also there would be the opportunity to cross-examine more so than in family court, those experts. And everything would be questioned more. There'll be more accountability. And so, you know, there are benefits of it becoming, or it under that umbrella of domestic abuse in the domestic abuse bill, and, you know, the terminology within the guidance notes of alienating behaviours, of being able to get into a criminal court. I still do wonder how domestic abuse would be tried within a criminal court setting when there are children involved, because potentially they are witnesses, and that's really difficult. It's really difficult to have child witnesses in cases. So at present, as a standalone, parental alienation is not illegal. The behaviours, and they use the CAFCAS, so in the Child Impact Assessment Framework, those are the behaviours that they're kind of putting alienation in, what they're using to measure alienation or assess alienation. Those behaviours are criminal. In terms of presenting it to court, it comes under the domestic abuse banner, and it will be tried under the domestic abuse bill. And obviously, you would use other pieces of legislation within that, human rights, you would use Children's Act. But again, it's out of the remit of criminal court at the moment. It's how familiar solicitors are with that crossover. So there's a way to go, I feel, before that first criminal case involving alienation will go into criminal court. But I do think it's only a matter of time before that happens. And one of the comments was that they'd had it at a high court and it had been proven, but the judge had dumbed it down. And again, that is, I can't see it. I can't see the comments, so I think I've summed that up, right? And you know, once appeals, with some cases, if people are able to, then they can get pushed up and appealed, and they can get that. And we often get that same response from the High Court, who do have better processes. And this is the frustrating. The processes exist. They're just used within the lower courts, within the family courts and magistrates who are presiding. They're not following those processes, so it has to be pushed up to the High Court, which is expensive and time consuming. And unfortunately for many parents, once it gets to High Court, a lot of the rulings say this should have happened, but there's not a lot we can do now, which I suppose on the one hand there's a validation for parents that it's in black and white. They can show the kids at some point, look, this is what happened, it's in black and white, but ultimately it's not making those changes there and then. And so any switch over from family to criminal would have access to better processes. Like I said, my concern is the protection of children from that sort of public arena, but also it even getting to court, the CPS agreeing for these cases and believing that there's enough evidence. But I think once in an ideal world, the criminal process would be followed within a family court, so that it was more about beyond reasonable doubt. So when allegations are made, it's, can we prove these beyond reasonable doubt, rather than the balance of probability, which is one step up from he said, she said. And so criminal court would allow more investigation to be done. I know that family court have brought in, it's got schedules and fact finding to try and bring that about, but for whatever reason those processes aren't being followed, and the accountability and the public nature of criminal court would mean that those processes would have to be followed. Like I said, for me there's a lot to be ironed out on this. It's not necessarily okay, great, we've got the answer, but it is a step in the right direction. And certainly getting alienating behaviours in the guidance is huge. It's a massive step forward. And I know that a lot of the radical feminist groups didn't want it for that reason, because it gives due process to these cases, which if people are making allegations, and Women's Aid and the like, they're not stupid, they might be delusional, but they must know that there are false allegations. They must know that. And so okay, yeah, and that's the thing, fact findings, family court don't always know what to do with these, because as a social worker, my background is social work, there was a huge shift in late 90s, maybe a bit later than that, about the voice. It actually might have been Margaret Thatcher, it might have been much earlier than that, but she started that push for consumer rights, and that included the family courts. So service users as we used to call them, gained more voice. They started giving more voice to people to talk about services and how to mold services, how to create services. And obviously in family court, children are part of that. So there was a massive shift towards the voices of service users being really important in the evolution of case management, outcomes, provision, delivery. And I think this is where, with alienation cases and any case actually that involves someone who has a cluster B personality disorder, that paranoid element, that distorted thinking, they are going to use that, and they are going to use the children, and that's where their power comes about. Is they almost go, well, don't take my word for it, I'm not going to say anything. Here, listen to the child that you you're desperate to listen to. We've got all these wishes and feelings charts and, so many activities for professionals to do with children to get them to tell them, their wishes and feelings. What's missed is that behind the scenes manipulation that happens in alienation cases, where the wishes and feelings of children are not the wishes and feelings of children. They are the parroted wishes and feelings of the alienating parent. And some professionals, and the more we talk about it, and then again, coming back to the criminal thing, that once it goes into criminal, that training companies are going to start having to add alienation. They're going to have to train psychologists and psychiatrists and counsellors and teachers and social workers. They are going to have to start training them all to know what it is and what it isn't. So that, again, is another positive of the criminal element of it, is there will be no excuse for people to not know what it is and what it isn't. And so he's making false allegations of alienation, he's an abusive father, and it's all about him getting control of me. Sometimes that will happen, but if we're trained to know, if the staff and everyone involved in family court are trained to know and recognise what alienation is, and therefore what it isn't, then those things will be wheedled out. Those false claims. So this is why I've never understood the real animosity towards alienation, because surely you want everyone to know. He said false alliteration. False allegations are not rare. False allegations are, and I'm not sure whether you talk about false allegations of parental alienation or false allegations of abuse, but they're not rare. Abusers will deflect. Abusers will project their own behaviours. So if they are being abusive, they will accuse the other person of doing that. And that's that bracket of personality disorder people. And personality disorders affect, I believe it's between 5 and 13% of the population, which is a reasonable amount. But the difference is with the cluster Bs, one of their big characteristic or diagnostic criteria is the relationships, the chaotic, manipulative, abusive relationships. And so that people with those cluster B personality disorders I haven't got a percentage, but far more likely to end up in family court. And so just as within a medical, a psychiatric unit, the levels are going to be higher. In family court, the levels are going to be higher. It's a condensed space. So it's not a general population. It is a condensed population because it provides someone with a personality disorder with everything that they need to feel special, to have all the attention on them, to play the victim or the hero. And so it's actually very concentrated, and like I say, those behaviours therefore are not rare. How they come about. So if the abuser is claiming alienation when actually they're the abusive one, that's going to happen. But yeah, no, unfortunately that is a false narrative that has been set by the radical feminists, that women and men can abuse. Women and men have personality disorders. Women and men can have cluster B personality disorders. So women and men can use false allegations. And actually just read a study, it's from 2021, where only 12% of sexual abuse allegations in family court as part of divorce were found to be genuine. That leaves 78% as false allegations. And that was women making false allegations. I have no doubt that men make false allegations of alienation as well. For me, it's not about gender. It is about abusive personalities, and that is not discriminatory in terms of gender. Cluster Bs are pretty much an equal mix of male and female. Abuse against, sexual abuse is against women. The systems, again, we're not really, that's a different argument. We're looking at parental alienation, and actually allegations of sexual abuse are always going to be difficult. And as I said at the start, if you've watched Anatomy of a Scandal, you will see it's really, really hard for those in private, in, one-on-one violence, whether that's 60%, I'll forget that bit. So when it's one-on-one sexual violence or domestic violence, only two people are witnessing it, it's hard to prove because it is subjective. It's one person's against the other and their view, and that, that show really, really well depicted that. Men equally, I know your comment was if women are abused, children suffer. If men are abused, children suffer. For parents, I think the thing here is that what we need to get very clear is, to children, there is no difference between the value of their mum and their dad. To them, they value that equally, their mum and their dad. So if mum is abusive, the kid will still love them. If dad is abusive, the kid will still love them. This is not about gender. And no, the children will not, and that's why in alienation cases it is so clever, is children speak out, and we know, everyone, my background in social work, I've done so many courses on paedophiles and on familial abuse, and the common thread is children do not speak about it. It's years later that children will come out and say, actually, this happened within the family. They might not tell until they're in their adulthood, because we're not meant to talk about it. The secrecy, and particularly within narcissistic families or cluster B families, secrecy is the hallmark. We do not talk. It's a cult. We do not talk about what happens in the family. What happens in Fight Club stays in Fight Club. What happens in these families stays in these families. And so children don't. And yet, in alienation cases, that kind of goes out the window. And suddenly children are saying, I've been abused by my parent. And everyone's going, oh, wow, okay, we've got to believe that. And I understand that that signals something. And I think that's the point of investigation, is this child is saying this, and that goes against what we know. Children, read the NSPCC websites, read any child abuse, and they will all state children struggle with disclosing abuse. It very rarely happens at the time of the abuse. It will happen much later on when someone says something, or their behaviour is something, and they finally feel like, I'm going to say this because I can't cope with it anymore. But at the time, they're so caught up in it. They're so love-bombed and they're so groomed that they don't. And so when a child is saying, I'm being abused, yes, we have to investigate. But we have to investigate it through the lens of children don't tend to speak up. So what's different in this case? And that is, again, that is where it going into a criminal court would allow for a different type of questioning of children, with real experts who can ask open-ended questions, who can use play therapy, who can build the rapport. Kafkas don't have time to build rapport with children in order to really understand. And so in family court at the minute, it's pretty much a throw a dart at a dartboard and let's hope for the best. And obviously criminal court would stop that. So anyway, I'm going to round it up there because I feel like I've gone off on my soapbox a little bit, but I hope that I've given you a bit of an overview of the legal and illegal elements in this, and I really appreciate your involvement and your questions, your comments. Obviously, if you're watching this at a later date, feel free to pop them below, and I will respond. And so for any of you that are going through this, we do have support. We have at the Nurturing Coach, we have specialist therapy. We work with lots of parents that are going through family court that have experienced alienation and are either at the point where they've not seen their kids, and then, you know, they're trying to deal with life after, you know, that grief, that holding grief, that ambiguous grief that comes from the hope that remains, I guess. So we work with a lot of people in that. And so, you know, if you need that therapeutic support, do reach out. Go to the nurturingcoach.co.uk. We have lots of resources on there for you. If you're going through court at the moment against a narcissist or a cluster B, and you need some idea on how the hell to handle it, go to getcourtready.co.uk. We have some specialist system and courses on there that can help you, all very reasonable, much cheaper than legal, and it's a one-off £57. You get to access the full course and get Parental Alienation guide as well, which I put away so I can't show you. So yeah, have a look at those two websites for support and resources. And yeah, if you've got any other questions, any topics you'd like me to cover, then just pop it in the comments and I will respond to them. So take care of everyone, and thanks for watching. Bye.